So welcome back to I Am Talking series, where I talk about enlightenment, beingness, and thereby invite it more and more, or the awareness of it more and more into my life. Nothing that ever happens is me, can be me. We live in a simulation, and how do we know about this simulation? How do we experience a me story where I go through a story, How do I experience a me that can go through a story? How do I know that there is a hero called my name or a loser called my name that goes through a story, a beginning, a middle part, an end, a new story? How do I know that? I'm aware of it. So how can I be any part of that story? How can I not be the awareness of the story, or the awareness of the guy or the girl who is the protagonist in the story? So awareness of beingness means everything is first aware and being, and then secondly a story develops because of certain frames that seem connected, right? Bentinho often talks about, like, if an apple falls to the ground or something like that, right? Then we see the apple fall to the ground. That's a story. There's an apple falling to the ground. More accurately, there's a story about me looking at an apple falling to the ground, but I think the me that is looking at the apple falling to the ground is a person with a body and a story and a birth and a death, right? Which is not true. I'm actually experiencing me. I'm actually experiencing being identified with a person who looks at an apple who falls to the floor, right? But Bentinho says, in actuality, that's not even the case. What I experience are an immense amount of frames per second that are so similar that they seem to be connected, right? So first we see the apple here, then we see the apple here, then we see the apple here. So we assume that the apple falls, but it's actually an apple being in midair, then an apple being in midair a little lower, then an apple being in midair a little lower, or more accurately, a guy who I call by my name, who I call by a certain name and think that I am this guy, watching an apple in midair, and then a guy looking at an apple a little bit lower, and finally a guy looking at an apple being on the floor, right? So there's an awareness to all of this, not just to the apple, not just to a guy looking at an apple, not just to thinking that the me thought that thinks I am this guy looking at this apple, but also to the thought that these frames per second are a story, that space and time represents reality. There's an awareness to all of that. And it's more accurate to say that I'm this awareness than I am the guy looking at the apple. Because the guy looking at the apple is still happening in awareness. Awareness isn't happening in the guy. Because awareness is not a happening. Awareness is a being. It's not even a being, it's actually aware of being, right? something along those lines. Again, I'm not saying the ultimate truth. I'm not claiming to know the ultimate truth. Just saying things that come up relative to I am, relative to enlightenment, and thereby trying to give it more space in my life, right? Because Bentinho says the awareness of beingness, or the awareness of existence, is actually the key to all the world's problems. At least that's how I understood him. So if we strive for world peace, it's more beneficial to realize the I amness than to feed someone. Not saying to not feed someone, but like the long-term game is enlightenment. It's not trying to help everybody, right? Even though that seems counterintuitive or weird, but yeah. And so I also want to talk about how hard it is to tune out of the thoughts because of the intense investment. I mean, my God, I want attention. I want to be acknowledged. I invested years and years and years into a feeling of me, into a story of me. And all I want is people acknowledging this. So if I tune out of that, how can I ask for acknowledgement then? How can I claim a victim status? How can I serve my egos, my gremlins, goals, if I'm nothing? If I'm not a thing, if I'm not an object, right? So actually enlightenment, or the I amness, destroys everything. It destroys the whole backbone of the matrix. It is really not helping my gremlin goals for safety, for status, you know. If I don't even believe in my status, because I don't believe I'm a person, then how can anyone else believe in my status? I mean, they still can, but then there's not that much in it for me anymore, right? So the ego really doesn't want me to tune out of the thoughts. So what it tries to do is conjure up new thoughts, actually old thoughts, as many as possible per second, so that there's a constant not awareness of beingness, a constant being invested and occupied with thoughts and feelings. So it goes against all my survival strategy, right? So it is hard to realize the beingness. It's very hard. And that's why a lot of people say it's woo-woo, it's bullshit, it's charlatanery, it's conspiracy, it's just trying to make money of stupid people, it's not real, it's unscientific. All these arguments from my perspective come from the ego. They are good, grounded arguments from the ego who conjures up realistic seeming reasons. Very good reasons. It tries to make a case against enlightenment. You know, I heard so many things for people, like for instance Buddhists. A lot of Buddhists believe that enlightenment can come only if you suffer like the Buddha and starve yourself to death, and then you can find enlightenment and give up all your possessions, right? And then other people say enlightenment can come just through the word and the acknowledgement acknowledgement of Jesus and that he is the only Son of God, right? So there's a lot of, there are millions of arguments against the recognition of beingness from a scientific point of view, an atheistic point of view, from a religious point of view, even from spiritual point of views, from a psychology point of view even, because psychology often works in a way where we constantly think about ourselves and analyze ourselves. But the recognition of beingness means to tune out of that game. Let the psychology be there. Let the story be there. Let the person going through the story be there. But tune out. See that it's happening in yourself. And whatever you grasp onto, you can only grasp onto it for a certain finite amount of time in a certain coordinates, in a certain space. So it cannot be you. Whatever is finite cannot be you. And I think for me this really feels very good and very liberating. It loosens up so much tightness in my body, and it's also the solution for being offended, right? Like yesterday somebody called me a jerk, and I was offended for a certain amount of time. But if I realized that the guy saying jerk to me and the guy being told to be a jerk, which is supposedly me, and the circumstances, like people watching the guy telling me a jerk, and the space, like the surroundings, like the physical surroundings of that. It's all happening in my awareness. I cannot say that this is happening outside of my awareness. It's only happening in my awareness. So what is bigger? What is already there? What is infinite in a way? I mean, you can argue that awareness is not even infinite, but it's way more infinite than any object in awareness, obviously. So it's all happening in awareness. So then I can just enjoy it a little bit and let it be there, and also forget about it, because there's really nothing in it for me. It really doesn't say anything about awareness, right? He told the object version of myself a jerk, right? So my face, my personality, my eyes, my thoughts of my name, that is what he calls a jerk. He doesn't call awareness a jerk, because the awareness of me is also the awareness of himself. So he would call himself a jerk, right? So he calls an object that is not me a jerk. So that is his right, Basically, he identifies with an object, and then he calls another object which he identifies as not him a jerk, right? So that recognition helps me not suffer this and not being that offended anymore, right? Because usually if I'm identified, I have to go through a process, right? After, once I'm offended, I have to go through a process of okay, he calls me a jerk, he thinks I'm a jerk. In his reality, I'm a jerk. I feel that label heavily on myself. It triggers a certain sense of unworthiness that is already there. So now I have to either do inner child work and resolve all of it and forgiveness and whatever, which is not bad, I'm not saying it's bad. Or, which is the traditional approach, I have to find reasons why he is in actuality the jerk, or he at least is more of a jerk than me, which is the ego approach, right? And both of those things are kind of exhausting. I mean, the inner child work, I think, is very healing, and it gives it momentum, and I love it. But additionally, or firstly, I think it's good to tune out of the whole thing and see that it's all happening in awareness, and that there's no me to be found in any of that whole scenario. Because if there's any me in that, it's the awareness of the whole thing. And it's not a me object, it's not a space-time me. It's a non-space, non-time me. Yeah. And I mean, I really love that. I had this idea that enlightenment is just for very special people, which is, it doesn't really make sense anymore, this statement, because if you are really special, that means you are identified with an object. You are identified as a special person, right? You are identified as a person that is more special than other people who you are not, right? So, but in actuality, enlightenment is for everybody. It's really not a 1% thing. It's for 100% of people. So I can be enlightened just as much as the Buddha can be, just as much as Jesus can be, or Shiva, or whoever thinks is like the most enlightened, or Bentinho. And I have a right to talk about it as much as I want to. It's not blasphemic or whatever, because I'm not the guy, right? I'm not the guy who gets identified as speaking. I'm the awareness of the guy. So me being the awareness of everything, of the guy, I can use the guy to talk about it, and thereby invite it in more and more. Even though I am, like, on a relative level, not enlightened at all. I'm a very average dude, And that I love that. An average dude realizing that he's the awareness of the dude. That's like jackpot. That's like the best news I ever got, right? So I love it, and I'm not sure. I mean, I will try to go with the flow, but I think I will never stop the series because it feels good. It helps me realize that I'm not an object, that I'm existing, that I'm never not existing, that I'm actually always aware in a way, even when I sleep and stuff, right? That I'm not my body, not my mind, I'm not my story, I'm not my childhood, I'm not my inner child, I'm not my biggest secret, I'm not the thing that I told nobody before, I'm not the guy who felt the most victimized in his life at one point. Not even that guy. I am. Ness is the basis of all of these things. And also I'm outside of space-time, which is also good news. I think that's actually the best news. I'm outside of space and time, right? Because time and space, I mean, it's horrible. Time means that I miss out on most things all the time, and space means that I'm just in one space, in a huge space, which is the universe, right? But this is a whole illusion. It's a whole simulation. So this is just an imagination. If I imagine myself missing out, I imagine being a guy. I imagine being the guy at a certain coordinates. I imagine being the guy at a certain time coordinate. And then I imagine all the things that this guy is missing out. So I imagine at least 4 things and identifying with them, right? And even though I'm like the most average guy ever, I can realize this, tune out of it, and tune into the beingness of it. And thereby leave space and time, or realize that I am outside of space and time, and space and time happens in my awareness. So I'm not just, in terms of me being awareness, I'm not just bigger than this body. I'm not just bigger than the me thought. I'm not just bigger than my whole life, my whole story. I'm actually bigger than space and time, which I imagine as being either infinite or close to infinite, like so big that it's actually, from a human perspective, infinite, right? If I imagine the universe or multiple universes, that's basically infinity to me already, because I'm so small relative to it. If I imagine billions and billions of time years, or billions and billions of years, right? That is basically infinity in terms of time relative to my probably 80 to 100 years of being a human. But I'm bigger than than billions of years, and I'm bigger than multiverses in terms of beingness, because beingness is outside of it. That's at least my current understanding. So that's another I Am Talking episode. And yeah, I hope somebody finds it interesting. I mean, already somebody finds it interesting, which is me, but somebody else maybe, or not. And if you are interested, you can also leave a comment if you feel like it.